Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 55 of Keep in Water. This week on YouTube, I've been watching everyone's videos from the Adam Buyer Grow and Show event, which looked a lot of fun, and it was nice, even from a distance, to put faces to names for those that, like me, don't get their face on camera too much. It's a shame really that such events aren't part of the other sides of pond keeping, but I guess the show part isn't really an aspect of keeping fish like mine, or even goldfish or sturgeon, in the same way as it is for koi. But this week did see me getting in on the act of buying new fish myself. As you may know, my 2 carp were bought in 2018 from VS Fisheries, a well-known and respected breeder of carp for fishing lakes. So, with my somewhat failed crucian carp experiment ended and 2 of my tench moved on, I have capacity for more fish, and have therefore reserved 2 mirror carp to add to the pond. They won't be coming until late October or early November, but that's no bad thing, as it gives me time, hopefully, to get on top of any health problems that remain in the pond. It's going to be interesting to see if they have any change on the behaviour of the other carp, in terms of added competition for food, possible increased confidence due to there being a larger group, and maybe even spawning. It's all a long way off, but they'll be well worth waiting for. In this week's episode, I've 2 topics. Firstly, another look at the fry, as I try to get a more accurate idea of how many there actually are, and where they spend their time in the pond. And secondly, I look at that pseudo upflow chamber in my multibay, have a look at how well it's working, and add some more media to it. Thank you to this week's new subscribers, and welcome back to old ones. If you're not subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you'd take the plunge. It's an utterly risk-free option, and you may even enjoy some of the content along the way. Many thanks if you do, it's a really big help. Right, I think that's all the housekeeping done, so it's time to start the first of this week's topics, the possibly increasing fry. As I showed in last week's episode, I could only confidently say I had about 8 rudd fry in the pond, as that was the most I'd seen in any one go. Having said that, I both hoped and guessed there were more, hiding away somewhere in the pond. But it's pretty tricky spotting them, both as they're tiny, but also due to glare and shadow. My guess was that if there were more, they'd be shoaling in amongst the marginal plants and spawning brushes, which is where the older rudd had probably laid the eggs to begin with. They definitely wouldn't be to the right of the pond, where the filter returns and aeration would create too much turbulence and flow. So, the likely hangout for the fry I decided on, I used the GoPro closer to the marginal plants and brushes to get a better look, and to be honest, I got a pretty good result pretty quickly. The rudd fry were congregated by the plants and in amongst the spawning brushes as I'd guessed, some coming out into more open water, then returning as others then did the same. Although from a distance the fry are quite hard to spot, and while this still may not be all of them, I think this clip gives a better idea of the total number. Getting an exact number for this shoal still proved a little difficult, as their small size and movement, the low light when I was filming, and my dodgy old GoPro meant that it was impossible to count them when in motion, and not much easier when I froze the image and tried counting the blurry shapes, however much I tried. Anyway, I plumped on 22, although I think it's possibly more. On top of that, when doing my filter clean today, I spotted a couple in amongst the plants that looked much smaller. Whether it was a trick of perspective or whether there was a second spawning, time will tell. It will be interesting to see how they get on and if this number changes, or even grows, over time. As I said last week, I don't feel a need to add any specific food for them at this point, as there's enough insect larvae and algae etc. for them to survive on. That will change though as they get bigger. 22 is obviously a lot more than 8, and gives them a fighting chance of a fair few making it through winter and into next year, and to then grow onto a more robust size. If you've not already seen it, check out episode 54, where I take a look at the risks they face within the pond, until they can get to that safer size like their parents. In episode 41, I turned the last chamber in my multibay from a Japanese matting one into a pseudo upflow filter. Although it's not really, there are similarities. Water flows in from the bottom and up through some K1, K+ media, which is restrained against some mesh, with waste being caught by the media as it flows through it. Except, in my case, the dimensions of the chamber are a little shallow and wide to work correctly, and there's not really enough media in it, something I'm putting right, at least partly, this week. It's also cleaned with air, and dirty water is drained from the bottom of the chamber, as with the better designed upflow filters. So, although it has some shared aspects, it's in no way as efficient as the shop-bought or competently made DIY versions. I did think it would be interesting, however, to look at how well it's working. The chamber not being transparent makes some views impossible, but there are other ways to judge it. Certainly, when I drain the chamber after boiling the media, the water that drains from it is pretty dirty, although to be fair, it was when I had Japanese matting in it. What is an interesting comparison is to look at the media in the upflow chamber and the other, normal static chamber. As this video shows, the media is noticeably dirtier in the upflow than in the static, which, if they were both functioning in the same way, you'd expect them to be roughly the same, or in fact the static one to be messier as the water comes to it first. Which makes me think that the grid keeping the media pushed and compacted under pressure helps catch more waste than media being, well, freer, which then makes me think whether I should add a grid above the media in the static bed, as the water flows upward through it as well, from the brushes. It's a pretty cheap experiment, as I have mesh and will just need one media grid, so I may give that a go in the future. I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on this. I'm not expecting any of the chambers to function as a properly made upflow filter, but any cheap way to increase the efficiency of the mechanical filtration has got to be a win, really. Thanks a lot for watching this episode of Keeping Water. I really do appreciate it. I can't thank everyone enough who likes, comments and subscribes. It's a great help and motivation to me. If you're not yet subbed, it's just one small click with your mouse or tap of your finger and you'll almost certainly not regret it. This following week I'll be given the second anti-parasite treatment, so it'll be a blue pond for most of the week. After that I'll give the fish a couple of weeks, and if there's no improvement it will be time for some new approaches, possibly involving separating some of the fish. We'll see. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.